Why didn't the American Revolution spread into Canada? There were two main reasons. First of all, there simply wasn't enough incentives for the Canadian colonies to join the revolution. Another reason was there was a growing mistrust and animosity towards the American colonies, brought on by a recent war and further differences. To understand the context, we need to look at how North America looked in the mid-18th century. The main European powers there were Great Britain and France. Britain had established colonies all along the east coast. New France discovered a huge expanse of land that included Quebec and Montreal in the north, all the way down to Louisiana at the Gulf of Mexico. The War of the Spanish Succession involved several European powers in the early 18th century, and this had a profound effect on North America. When the dust settled, France was forced to cede several of its territories, as dictated by the 1713 Treaty of Utrecht. France was also specifically forced to hand over Acadia, or Nova Scotia, to Britain. Nova Scotia, Latin for New Scotland, was a real prize. Not only did it open up another port on the increasingly busy East Coast, but it also brought opportunities to link up with the nearby lucrative fur trade. Britain was also wary of the large Catholic population in the region, which an English Protestant colony would help combat. In 1749, the city of Halifax had around 2,500 settlers, from mainly England and Scotland. Further to the west, the New France cities of Montreal and Quebec were already well established. Before I continue, I'd like to take a few moments to thank the sponsor of today's video, Warhammer 40k Tacticus, an exciting turn-based tactical strategy game, officially licensed by Games Workshop, and set in the eternal conflict of the Warhammer 40k universe. Enjoy tactical, fast-paced battlefield gameplay, and command some of the universe's most powerful warriors, where you are in full control, and only superior tactics can deliver victory. Assemble and lead more than 80 legendary Warhammer 40k champions from 18 playable factions like the Necrons, who are a good faction for first-time players. I especially enjoy fighting against or strategizing with other players, so one of my favorite Warhammer 40k Tacticus game modes is the time-limited tournament arena, where you can deploy up to 5 characters of mixed factions against other players. Tacticus is the go-to game for top-quality tactical gaming, with an average rating of 4.5 in the app stores, and the developers are always introducing fresh content, exciting features, new game modes, and challenging events. Check out our link in the description, or scan the QR code to download Warhammer 40k Tacticus today. From now until February 1st, use code HELLOJAN when you sign up, and earn 2,000 gold and 50 blackstones. Quebec served as an administrative capital and was constantly exchanging goods with traders back in France. Montreal had grown into a thriving hub for the fur trade, and by 1750, Quebec had a population of over 50,000. All of this will matter a lot in the revolution that will come. Meanwhile, Britain's other American colonies were starting to realize their identities. New England's economy was very much centered around the maritime industry. Further down the coast were the middle colonies, which included the multicultural cities of New York and Philadelphia. The southern colonies such as Virginia and South Carolina were very much based on agriculture, with their plantations cranking out huge volumes of tobacco, cotton, and rice. And then, in 1754, everything changed. The French Indian War was an offshoot of the 7 Years' War that broke out in Europe. The 7 Years' War featured arch-enemies Britain and France going to battle yet again, along with several allies on either side, including Prussia, Spain, and Russia. The French Indian War was the American theater, with French troops doing battle with the English. Both sides were supported by native tribes, and both sides realized the winner had much to gain. The French were hopelessly outnumbered, though, with a total New France population of around 60,000, while British colonies had close to 2 million people. Because of the fighting taking place back in Europe, both countries were unable to spare many soldiers to assist in the North American conflict. The French relied heavily on the support of the native tribes. Britain, too, also used the help of the Iroquois people, along with a large contingency of colonial militia. This fighting would prove to have a tremendous influence over the northern colonies' position in the American Revolution. British militia from the 13 colonies were effectively fighting against many of the French settlers of Quebec. This would understandably create mistrust and tension further down the line. In 1755, the British seized Fort Beauséjour, located on the border between Nova Scotia and Acadia, and subsequently commanded the expulsion of Acadians. Nova Scotia quickly became a British stronghold, with more and more French relocating to Montreal, Quebec, and the surrounding regions. The French were gradually overpowered and conceded defeat in 1763. In the aftermath of the war, France ceded huge portions of land to Great Britain. They claimed almost all of the French territory in North America. Britain finally got its hands on Quebec and Montreal. Nova Scotia was starting to grow, with a rising population of British settlers, in a colony based around the British legal system and administration. Quebec, however, was a different story. Everybody spoke French. The colonies were administered in French, and they had their own civil code. One of the important facets of colonial government in Quebec was the land distribution, known as the seigneurial system. This basically involved the king appointing officials to act as land distributors, who would receive plots of land and decide who could live on them. This was all literally foreign to the British. In the past, as with Ireland, Britain had shown a low tolerance for a Catholic-based society and government. However, Quebec was a tricky one. The population was growing, and the economy was continually improving. To tamper with a good thing seemed like a bad idea, and in 1774, Britain passed what would prove to be a landmark policy, the Quebec Act. The Quebec Act pretty much allowed the Quebecois to continue living as they had been for over 150 years. This was huge. The French-based land distribution system would stay. To the people of Quebec, this showed great faith in their ability to manage the province on their own. Another surprise was that they were allowed to continue with their existing system of French civil law, instead of replacing it with the English common law. Civil law applied to any disputes between civilians, such as unpaid debts, property damage, or divorce cases. While Britain assumed control of criminal law in the new province, being able to preserve their civil law liberties was a massive boost for the newly conquered Quebecois. Britain was clearly doing everything in its power to maintain the status quo and not ruffle too many feathers. However, most French were nervous as to what would happen with religion. The vast majority of the Quebec province was Catholic, a faith Britain famously had a problem with. But Britain wanted to keep the new province on side, and gave the green light to Catholicism. The people would be free to practice their religion as they liked, and were under no obligation to swear allegiance to Protestantism. This was especially demonstrated by allowing the Catholic Church to continue collecting money from the people, called tithes. To the Quebecois, this was much more than they were hoping for. Furthermore, many also openly admitted that they felt economically stronger being part of the British Empire, which had outperformed France in terms of colonization and military prowess. In Nova Scotia, the British victory in the French-Indian War had seen a huge exodus of French Acadians, leaving the colony mostly populated with British settlers. There were, however, a considerable number of people that migrated there from New England, a colony that would soon be the focus of the Revolution. It's important to remember at this stage, there was no concept of America and Canada. There were simply the British colonies in North America. The major difference was that the 13 colonies, from Massachusetts to Georgia, were used to self-governance and were fast developing a sense of independence. They felt economically viable, they were increasingly self-sufficient, and they were growing rapidly. And at the end of the French-Indian War, the push for more independence surged. The British government was left financially reeling after the all-inclusive 7 Years' War, and sought to regain some revenue by taxing its American colonies. This came in the form of the Stamp and Sugar Acts, plus stricter regulating of customs activities. The final straw came when Britain imposed a Tea Act, effectively creating a monopoly of the tea trade to benefit the British East India Company. This enraged the 13 colonies, who saw it as being taxed without representation. Britain sent in more troops, which only ignited the situation. By early 1775, war was imminent, and the 13 colonies looked to the Quebec province and Nova Scotia for support. The Patriots, or Revolutionaries, were confident that Nova Scotia would join the fight. There were already many former New Englanders living there, who would undoubtedly empathize with their plight. While this was somewhat true, as many of the people there weren't happy about the new taxes, the revolts were limited, probably due to lack of organization in the small settlements, and the strong British military presence. As Britain had a naval base in Halifax, it didn't take long before American privateers began attacking Nova Scotia ships. Privateers were a form of commissioned pirates, and the Patriots wanted to stop any trade between Nova Scotia and Loyalists in New England. Over the course of the war, the Americans sank or captured over 200 Nova Scotian vessels. Needless to say, this hardly endeared the Patriots with the people of Nova Scotia. Added to this was an influx of Loyalists. During the Revolution, thousands of colonists, still loyal to the Crown, upped and moved to Nova Scotia, further cementing its close connection to Britain. Even more resistant to the Revolution were the people in Quebec. Not only were they more than satisfied with the conditions under British rule, but the bitter French-Indian War was still fresh in their memories. The Quebecois had their own culture, their own language, and their own customs. There was simply no motivation to join the American cause, nor did they want to. Furthermore, during the invasion of Quebec, the American revolutionaries tried to attack the province of Quebec and encourage the French population to join against the British. This military campaign in Quebec failed for the revolutionaries, and with that, their chances of spreading the revolution up north were ruined. The American revolutionaries had good reasons to fight for their independence. They believed the time was right to break away from Britain. Gradually, the 13 colonies came to realize that recruiting Quebec and Nova Scotia simply wasn't going to happen. Thanks again to the sponsor of today's video, Warhammer 40k Tacticus. Use our link in the description or scan the QR code to download Warhammer 40k Tacticus today. From now until February 1st, use code HELLOJAN when you sign up, and earn 2,000 gold and 50 Blackstones.